Earl Thompson had always said there were two kinds of truckers, the ones who feared the open road and the ones who feared what might be hiding on it. Earl liked to think he was in the second group. After all, he'd been driving for nearly 30 years and had seen just about everything the road had to offer. Drunken hitchhikers, bizarre accidents, even the occasional animal staring him down in the dead of night. But none of that ever really scared him. Until tonight. It started with the storm. The kind of storm that felt alive, thick clouds swallowing the moon. Rain coming down so hard it sounded like nails hammering the roof of the cab. Dispatch had warned him about bad weather ahead, so he'd taken a detour. A narrow, winding back road that cut through miles of thick, unbroken forest. It wasn't his first choice, but Earl wasn't one to argue with weather reports. It was about 2 hours into the detour when he first heard it. A soft thud coming from the back of the trailer. Earl barely noticed it over the pounding rain, chalking it up to the wind or maybe a loose strap on one of the crates he was hauling. Nothing unusual. But then it came again. Thump, thump. Louder this time. Earl turned down the radio, his knuckles tightening on the wheel. He stared out into the night where his headlights cut through the storm, illuminating nothing but the lonely stretch of road ahead. A deep unease settled into his chest as the thumping grew more persistent. It didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like something, or someone, was hitting the back of his trailer. He flicked a glance at his rear-view mirror, but all he saw was the outline of his trailer, its red taillights blinking through the curtain of rain. He told himself it was probably just the wind rattling the cargo, or maybe one of the crates had shifted during the drive, but the noise didn't stop. Thump, 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 and then came the scratching, faint at first, like fingernails scraping against metal. Earl's stomach twisted into a knot. He'd hauled plenty of strange things in his time, furniture, machinery, even some military-grade equipment once, but nothing that should be making that kind of noise. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. 12:30 a.m. The next gas station was still about 30 miles ahead, and there wasn't a soul for miles. Stopping now in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the storm, didn't seem like a good idea. He'd check the load once he got to the station, but the noise was growing louder. The scratching, the thumping, whatever was back there seemed to be getting more desperate. His heart began to race, and though he wasn't one to panic, something about this felt off. Way off. He glanced at the rearview mirror again, but the storm had swallowed the road behind him in darkness. Still, the noise persisted. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the road for a brief second, and Earl's heart skipped a beat. For a split second, he thought he saw a figure pale and hunched on the back of his trailer. His pulse quickened. He shook his head, blinking, chalking it up to exhaustion or a trick of the lightning. He'd been driving long enough to know how the mind played tricks on you during late shifts. Still, the thumping continued as if something or someone was inside the trailer. Thump, scratch, scratch, thump. He wasn't imagining it. Someone was in the back. That's when he noticed the cargo manifest on the passenger seat. He hadn't thought much about it when he picked it up. Just another load, just another job. But now, his hands trembled as he picked up the clipboard and scanned the details. The cargo was listed as classified. No description of the contents, no weight details, no signatures, just classified. His mind raced. What the hell was he transporting? He had carried everything from perishables to weapons before, but there was always paperwork. Always something to explain what was in the trailer, not this time. The more he stared at the manifest, the more his blood ran cold. As if on cue, the scratching grew louder, frantic. Earl's eyes darted to the rearview mirror again. A voice inside his head screamed to pull over and check the trailer, but another voice, the louder, more practical one, told him to keep driving. Whatever was back there wasn't something he wanted to face in the middle of a dark, stormy road. His truck roared down the empty highway, the rain slamming against the windshield. The lights of the gas station finally appeared in the distance, flickering like a mirage through the storm. Earl's breath came out in short, shallow bursts. Whatever was back there, he'd deal with it at the station. He wasn't about to stop now. He pulled into the gas station, parking under the flickering lights. The place was nearly deserted, just a lone attendant sitting behind the counter inside. Earl killed the engine and sat for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. The rain drummed steadily on the roof. He grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment, its cold metal familiar in his hand. He wasn't sure what he was about to find, but he knew he couldn't keep ignoring it. His boots splashed in the growing puddles as he stepped out of the cab, the wind howling around him. The thumping had stopped, but the silence was worse. Earl made his way to the back of the trailer, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He hesitated for a moment, his breath fogging in the cold night air. Then, with a shaking hand, he unlatched the door and swung it open. The beam of his flashlight swept over the crates, stacked neatly in rows, exactly where they were supposed to be. No signs of anything disturbed, no signs of movement. And yet Earl felt it. A presence. Something was there, hiding just out of sight. He stepped closer, his heart pounding in his ears. His boots echoed in the empty trailer, the smell of damp metal filling his nostrils. He shined the light over the crates, his breath shallow and quick. Nothing looked out of place, but the air felt thick, oppressive. And then he saw it, a trail of wet, muddy footprints leading from the back of the trailer to one of the larger crates. The footprints were small, like a child's, but smeared as if whatever had left them was crawling. His flashlight trembled in his hand as he moved closer to the crate. The top of it was slightly ajar, as though it had been opened recently. Earl's mouth went dry. He wasn't supposed to touch the cargo, but whatever was in that crate wasn't staying put. As he reached for the lid, a voice echoed in his mind. "Don't open it. Leave it alone." But his hand moved on its own, driven by a mix of curiosity and dread. With a deep breath, he pried the crate open. The stench hit him first, like rotting meat. Earl gagged, staggering back as his flashlight flickered. But before he could retreat, he saw it. Something moved inside the crate. A pale, writhing figure covered in slick, wet skin. Its eyes snapped open, wide, black, and full of malice. Earl stumbled backward, his flashlight slipping from his hand as the thing in the crate lunged forward. It wasn't human, its limbs too long, its movements unnatural, like a spider scuttling across the floor. It let out a low, guttural growl that echoed through the trailer. Earl turned and ran, slamming the trailer doors behind him, heart racing as he scrambled back into the cab. His hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition, his mind reeling from what he had just seen. As he peeled out of the gas station, rain pounding on the windshield, the trailer rocked violently, as if something inside was trying to break free. He didn't know what was in those classified crates. He didn't want to know. But he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't meant to be out there. And now, it was. No one drove Route 77 after dark. It wasn't written in any guidebooks or posted on any signs, but locals knew it, and truckers passing through the area learned it quickly. There was something wrong with that road, a narrow stretch of highway that sliced through dense, overgrown woods in rural Georgia. Earl Bigfoot Rollins had heard the rumors. He wasn't superstitious, but after years on the road, he'd learned to listen to his gut. Some places were just bad. It was a late October night, the sky moonless, and oppressive darkness that swallowed the world whole. The only light came from his truck's headlights, which cut through the black, revealing the endless road and the trees that leaned in on either side, gnarled branches hanging overhead like skeletal arms. Earl was hauling a load of furniture from a factory in Atlanta to a small town deep in the bayous. He wasn't supposed to take Route 77, but a massive wreck on the main highway had forced him to detour onto the cursed road. Just a few hours, he told himself. He could tough it out. But from the moment his wheels hit the cracked asphalt, he had felt it, a weight pressing down on him, a feeling that something was watching. The road stretched out in front of him, winding through the woods in sharp, jagged turns. Earl's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The radio crackled with static before cutting out completely, leaving him in a suffocating silence. The only sound was the steady rumble of the engine and the rain beginning to patter against the windshield. He saw the first one about 20 minutes into the drive, a figure standing by the side of the road facing the trees, completely still. At first, Earl didn't think much of it. Could have been a hitchhiker or some poor soul stranded on the roadside. But something about the way the figure stood, rigid, unmoving, made his stomach churn. He pressed his foot down on the gas, pushing the truck a little faster. When he glanced back in the rear-view mirror, the figure was gone. Disappeared into the dark. Earl told himself it was nothing. The road played tricks on tired eyes. But 5 minutes later, he saw another one. This time, the figure was closer to the road, standing in the exact same position, facing the trees. Earl felt a chill crawl down his spine. His headlights washed over the figure, and for a split second, he saw it clearly. The thing was tall, unnaturally tall, its arms long and hanging awkwardly at its sides. Its skin was pale, almost gray, and its clothes were tattered rags. What unsettled him most, though, was the stillness. It didn't move at all. Not a shift of weight, not even a twitch. And then, as his truck passed, Earl swore he saw its head turn slightly, just enough for him to catch a glimpse of hollow black eyes staring right at him through the rain. His chest tightened, heart racing. He didn't dare look back in the mirror this time. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so hard they hurt, and he pushed the truck faster, the engine roaring as it sped down the narrow road. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the rain began to pour harder, lashing against the cab in thick sheets. Earl's eyes strained to see the road ahead, his headlights barely cutting through the downpour. He was on edge now, every shadow, every flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye setting his nerves ablaze. And then it happened again. A flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead, and there it was, another figure, standing dead center in the middle of the road. Earl slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt as it skidded across the wet asphalt. His heart pounded in his chest, breath catching in his throat. The figure stood perfectly still, right in front of the truck's headlights, facing away, just like the others. Earl blinked, trying to shake the fog from his mind. This one was different. He could see more details now. Its clothes were old, rotting, skin clinging to bone, too thin, too frail. And its head, it wasn't right. It started to move, the head twitching with a sickening crack, turning slowly toward him without the body following. The bones in its neck popped and snapped as the head rotated a full 180 degrees to face him. Earl's breath hitched in his throat. The face looking back at him was wrong. Its eyes were wide, hollow, black pits, but it was the mouth that sent a cold, crawling terror through his veins. The mouth stretched impossibly wide from ear to ear, filled with jagged, broken teeth that seemed to be rotting. It grinned at him, a smile that held no warmth, no humanity, only hunger. Earl's body went cold. His fingers trembled as they reached for the gear shift, but his hand slipped, heart hammering in his chest. He tried again, and this time slammed the truck into reverse. The engine roared to life, but the figure remained, staring, that grotesque grin etched across its decaying face. The truck lurched backward, tires screeching on the slick road. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, grinning. Earl's mind raced, panic rising in his throat. He had to get out of here. He slammed the truck into drive, swerved around the figure, and floored the gas. The truck shot forward, leaving the figure behind in a blur of rain and darkness. But as he sped down the road, the fear didn't leave him. It clung to his skin like the rain, thick and suffocating. Earl glanced in his rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure standing in the middle of the road, watching him leave. But instead, he saw something else. A shadow. At first, it was just a dark smudge in the corner of the mirror, but as he looked closer, his stomach dropped. Something was moving on the back of the trailer, clinging to it. Earl's blood ran cold. His hands shook as he gripped the wheel tighter, eyes darting between the road ahead and the mirror. The shadow moved closer, crawling over the trailer, its long, spindly arms stretching across the metal. The thing was climbing, inching closer to the cab. He slammed on the gas again, the engine roaring as the truck sped faster down the road. The trees blurred past, rain pouring harder, but no matter how fast he went, the thing on the trailer kept pace. It clung to the side of the truck like a spider, its limbs too long, too thin, dragging across the metal with a hideous scraping sound that set Earl's teeth on edge. Then it reached the cab. Earl's heart pounded in his ears as he felt the truck shudder beneath him. The sound of scraping metal grew louder, closer. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as he glanced out the driver's side window. And there it was. The thing's face was pressed against the glass, hollow eyes staring in, grinning that awful, wide grin. Its skin was stretched taut over its skull, thin and translucent, revealing dark veins pulsing beneath the surface. The rain slid off its face in thick, oily streams, but it didn't blink, didn't flinch. It just stared. And then, with slow, deliberate movements, it tapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Earl's breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed at him to floor it, to get away, but his body was frozen in terror. The thing grinned wider, its teeth black and jagged as it pressed its face harder against the window, the glass creaking under the pressure. Suddenly, with a shattering crack, the glass spiderwebbed, the window splintering under the weight of the thing's bony hand. Earl's paralysis broke. He slammed the truck into a higher gear and peeled off down the road, the broken glass cutting into his arm as he swerved, trying to shake the thing off. It didn't work. The creature's arms stretched impossibly long, gripping the side of the truck, its head whipping back and forth as it crawled onto the hood. Earl's heart raced. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as he watched in horror. The thing's head twisted, craning to look at him, its grin wider than before, jagged teeth gleaming in the dim light. It raised one long, clawed finger, tapping the windshield this time. Tap, tap, tap. Earl's entire body trembled with fear. His mind was screaming to get out, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The road was endless. The thing on the hood wasn't going anywhere, and then it spoke. Its voice was low, guttural, like the sound of bone scraping against bone. The words came out slow, deliberate. "I found you." Earl's scream echoed through the night as the creature lunged forward, shattering the windshield with a deafening crash. The last thing he saw was its gaping maw filled with teeth descending on him, pulling him into the darkness. Mike Holloway was a seasoned truck driver with 20 years behind the wheel. He knew the highways like the back of his hand, especially Route 13, a desolate stretch of road that twisted through the Appalachian Mountains. The route was notorious for its accidents, especially during the night. Over the years, drivers claimed to see things, strange, unexplainable sights, but Mike never put stock in ghost stories. He was a man of reason. But that was before the night he took his final drive on Route 13. It was late October, just as the first chill of autumn settled in. Mike had a late-night haul, transporting refrigerated goods across state lines. As usual, his company assigned him the midnight shift. He preferred it that way. No traffic, no noise, just the hum of the engine and the endless road ahead. The skies were moonless, and the thick forest on either side of the road only added to the oppressive darkness. As Mike's rig rumbled down the highway, he noticed his gas gauge dipping faster than usual. His heart sank. He knew there wouldn't be another gas station for at least 50 miles. He had passed a small, rundown station a few miles back, one he had never seen before, but it seemed odd. Desperate, he decided to turn around and refuel. He could have sworn it hadn't been there before, but maybe he just never noticed it on his late-night runs. As he pulled into the gas station, it was clear the place had seen better days. The sign was barely legible, and the pumps looked like relics from the 1960s. A single dim light flickered above the station, casting long shadows that danced with every gust of wind. There was no one around, no attendant, no customers, just an eerie silence. Mike stepped out of the cab, the cold night air biting his skin. The smell of damp earth and gasoline lingered in the air as he walked toward the pump. As he began filling the tank, something caught his attention from the corner of his eye, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the flickering light. It was a woman, her long, stringy hair draped over her face, wearing what appeared to be a tattered white dress. She stood motionless, just staring at him. Mike felt his stomach tighten, an instinctive fear creeping up his spine. "Can I help you?" he called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman didn't respond, nor did she move. She just kept watching. Feeling uncomfortable, Mike hurried with the gas, keeping one eye on the woman. But when he looked back, she was gone. Vanished. He hadn't heard her move or walk away. Mike's pulse quickened, but he shook it off. Maybe it was his tired mind playing tricks on him. With the tank full, Mike climbed back into the cab, his hands slightly trembling as he turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he wasted no time pulling out of the station. The strange encounter gnawed at his thoughts, but he convinced himself it was nothing. Just an old woman, lost or confused. But as he drove further down the road, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. About 10 miles down Route 13, the night grew even darker, the trees forming a dense wall on either side of the road. That's when Mike saw her again, the woman standing in the middle of the highway, illuminated by his headlights. He slammed on the brakes, his tires screeching as the truck came to a halt mere feet from where she stood. She didn't flinch, didn't move, just stared at him, her face still obscured by her hair. Mike's breath came in ragged gasps. There was no way she could have gotten here before him. It was impossible. He blinked, and she was gone again, as if she had never been there. He felt a cold sweat break out across his skin. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. He tried to tell himself he was just overtired, hallucinating, but the creeping dread in his gut told him otherwise. Deciding not to stop, Mike hit the gas and pushed the rig forward. The radio crackled to life, but instead of music or static, there was a soft whisper, a woman's voice, faint and barely audible. "He's coming for you." Mike's heart lurched in his chest. He reached for the radio knob, twisting it furiously, but the voice wouldn't stop. "He's coming for you. He's coming for you." Frantic, he yanked the plug, silencing the radio. For a moment, the cab was filled with nothing but the sound of his own labored breathing and the rumble of the truck's engine. But then, he felt it. A presence. He wasn't alone in the cab. In the rearview mirror, Mike saw the woman again. This time, sitting in the passenger seat, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow and lifeless. She smiled, a sickly, twisted grin, her teeth sharp and glistening in the dim light. Mike screamed, swerving the truck violently. He could feel her cold breath on his neck as she leaned in, whispering something unintelligible, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. He lost control of the rig, and it veered off the road, smashing through the guardrail. Everything went black. When Mike woke, he was lying on the ground, his body bruised and battered. The truck was overturned a few feet away, its engine still sputtering weakly. But the woman was gone. He lay there, gasping for breath, trying to comprehend what had just happened. It wasn't until the paramedics arrived that Mike learned the full extent of the horror. As they pulled him from the wreckage, one of the EMTs said, "You're lucky, man. You drove straight off Dead Man's Curve." Mike blinked, confused. "Dead Man's Curve?" The EMT nodded. "Yeah, Route 13 is famous for it. A lot of drivers have died there over the years. Most say it's haunted. You wouldn't be the first to claim they've seen her." "Seen who?" The EMT gave him a grim look. "The woman in white. She's the ghost of a hitchhiker who died here decades ago. They say she stands on the side of the road waiting for someone to take her home. But once you see her, she doesn't let go." Mike's blood ran cold. He had heard the stories, sure, but he never believed them. Not until now. As the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, Mike glanced back at the wreckage, his heart pounding in his chest. There, standing on the edge of the road, was the woman in white. She didn't move, didn't speak. But her eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, Mike saw the truth. He wasn't going to escape her. She wasn't done with him yet.